Welcome, my name is Mia Bays and I run Bird's Eye View, and we are a 16-year long mission and we have many more years are not left in us yet, I'm sure, a mission to bring ever greater audiences to films by women. We started life as a film festival showing films by women, written by women from all over the world. And in 2017, we decided that just having a festival for 10 days a year was not enough, and actually we ramped up our activity to being 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because we realized that films that were written by women, directed by women, were very often marginalized, underinvested in, not released in a substantial enough way, not enough faith was put in female gaze. So we do not think that films by women are better or worse, they're just different. It's about celebrating different perspectives. So it's not necessarily Bird's Eye View is also a camera position. It's the bird sees everything. It's not necessarily a superior position, it's just an expansive position. Our mission, which is BFI National Lottery funded, is called Reclaim the Frame, and they're one of our key partners, our partner tonight, the Barbican. So we show films, we work with cinemas all over the country. Obviously, a lot of them have been closed for unprecedented circumstances for several months. Thankfully, the Barbican and most of the others are open again, and but we understand also that many people don't want to feel safe and don't feel safe going into venues. So also, what's kind of happened is much more of a kind of streaming revolution in these last few months, that people are also seeing films online, and this is one such movie. It's accessible in cinemas, it's also available online, and that is to make our events also accessible to everyone. We welcome everyone. You have joined the Bird's Eye View flock. And so as we are going to be talking, it's very particularly relevant perspective tonight, that we're going to be talking about the female perspective in art as well as in cinema. And as in film, it's really about talking to, what we'll get into, I'm sure, substantially, is about just shifting the dominant gaze along the gaze at all levels of making, thinking, showing, being in film and in art has been framed by the privileged few. And so we are going to unpack the brilliant film by Halina Dryschka, as well as also meet two experts. So I'd like to welcome Halina, the wonderful filmmaker. This is such a great piece of work. So lovely to meet you and welcome you back. And Eleanor Nairne, who is our art gallery curator at the Barbican. So welcome, Eleanor. And Jennifer Higgie, who's editor at large. I'm also large, so we will maybe converse around what it's like to be at large. So editor at large of Frieze magazine, and also a podcaster. Terrific, beautiful piece of work, Bow Down Women in Art. What a wonderful series. So welcome to everybody.
Thank you so much.
So I'd like to start with Halina. If you could just set the scene for us. You said one of your quotes was, when you saw Hilma af Klint's work and what kick-started your journey to making Beyond the Visible was that her art spoke to you more profoundly than any you'd ever seen. So talk us through that journey.
Fine, I didn't get the last word.
So I was just quoting you that you.
You
heard that back. So talk us through what it was about the art that struck you so profoundly, and then also why you decided to make a film about it, because this is your first feature. So that's quite a big ambition, which we applaud you for.
Yes, I'm sorry, just the microphone was at the moment gone. It was indeed a very profound situation, this museum, when I went to here in Berlin to the exhibition in, that's already 7 years ago, in 1913. And as I said, I was becoming actually quite angry, because I thought, who is responsible for not telling me? And I knew at the very moment, many people must have been. And And maybe I would say probably with some artists I wouldn't care so much, but with Hilma af Klint I cared a great deal, because actually I have to say it probably right now, I think this is going beyond art. And this is art, and I have never seen that before. And I think, even for me as an artist, I think every artist would like to go to this place where Hilma af Klint went. That you do something that is really important, because it tells a lot about life. And that was, actually that was the experience, and that's what I was trying to show in the film. And
Wonderful. And then how easy was it to make? How did you experience what Hilma experienced, which were barriers to? Was she well known to the people you were asking money for?
No, nobody knew her, and of course, and nobody knew me. And it's not, and if you do something, of course, it's always sad if somebody tells you, no, you're not going to do this project because nobody knows this woman. Okay. Then we wouldn't know anything. But it was not easy making the film at all. And we didn't get money, for example, from Sweden at all. The Swedish film funding didn't give us any cent, not even support or something. And even nowadays, I think the Swedish audience has discovered Hilma af Klint, because after the big show, and then the Guggenheim, and then even after this new show started just now. But in the end, it was really, really hard to find supporters.
Okay, so let's put a pin in that and come back to that. So, Eleanor, I'd like to welcome your thoughts on the film, your response to the film first and foremost.
Thank you. I mean, it was such a great opportunity to join this conversation, really. I mean, I would say I maybe had a similar feeling to Halina. I discovered Hilma af Klint's work in 2016 when the Serpentine did a show here in London, which is, I think, when many people in London first had a chance to see a number of the paintings. And then was lucky enough to see the show 2 years ago at the Guggenheim. And I guess the first thing to say is just the scale. To be standing in front of these paintings, which are 3 meters high, and to be imagining physically what it took for this woman to have made these paintings, which was a kind of idea that you come to in the film, Halina, in terms of sort of thinking about her walking barefoot over this material and how it existed in relationship to the reach of her body. It's awesome, literally awesome, and incredibly exciting in terms of the history of abstraction. And there are, of course, myriad questions to be asked about why we didn't know more about her sooner. And many of the questions that Jennifer asked so pertinently in the Bow Down podcast about what does it take? What does it take to be recognized? And then what does it take to remain recognized? Because af Klint was not discovered in the 21st century. You know, she was exhibiting to a small degree within her lifetime. And she's exhibiting internationally. You know, she's in the LA County Museum of Art in the late 1980s. So she's not a new discovery, but if you went to the show at the Guggenheim in 2018, you'd be forgiven for believing that. So I think that's one of the most important questions that comes across very powerfully in Halina's film, is how do we address these omissions, not just in single instances with an artist like Hilma, but also more broadly in terms of the kind of structural problems that af Klint faced.
Excuse me, Eleanor, did you just say you are forgiving the MoMA?
No, forgiving the audience, because I think
the audience
who went to the Guggenheim in 2018 would have been very quick to think this is a brand new discovery. It's been locked away in Sweden all this time, and actually this is the first moment that we've had to see this work, and that's not quite the case. We can come back to whether or not we forgive MoMA.
Yeah.
We'll never forgive MoMA.
We won't.
That's fighting talk, Jennifer. So let's wind back. So yeah, well, first of all, when did you discover Hilma, and then your thoughts around the film
Yeah.
and its impact?
I first heard of Hilma actually way back it was about 20 years ago, when two of my friends, artist friends, had a tiny show in these rundown rooms in London's Fitzrovia, which they called Dear Hilma. And I went along to this show and I had no idea who Hilma was. And they had recreated a sort of a room that was like a seance, and they'd done the most exquisite drawings. It was Donna Huddleston and Frank Hannon. And so I was absolutely entranced by their exhibition, and that inspired me to, which is one of the reasons that they did it, was to inspire other people to, go in and look into Hilma's work. And so then I saw her work at the Camden Art Centre in, when was that, 2006, I think. And then I went to Stockholm, because by now I was a big Hilma fan. And so I went to the Modern Museum in 2013. And I can honestly say that exhibition was probably the most moving exhibition I've ever seen. And it was I agree with what Halina said about it being almost more than art. Art is obviously a massive and all-embracing way of working in the world. But there was something about this show that was, even if you didn't understand what her diagrams were signifying, or what she meant by a certain use of color, or how she was interpreting theosophy, there was something that was so primal and vital about this work, that was so beautiful and so joyful and so heartbreaking, that I was absolutely speechless. I remember someone trying to talk to me in the exhibition, and I was a bit like, go away, I can't talk to you now, And I found it an extremely moving and baffling as well. I was baffled. I was like, why don't we know more about her? Why is Kendinsky considered the first artist in the West, at least, to make abstract pictures? Why didn't she want her work to be shown for 20 years? Why was she complicit in a way in her own oblivion? Was she complicit in not wanting to put herself forward? Did she perhaps think that she got enough spiritual and artistic nourishment from the 5 women, her group of 5 that she worked with? Yes, art history is a patriarchal history, but also, why didn't she, as an artist who trained at an art school and who had quite a successful career herself, why wasn't she putting up her hand and making more of a noise about her discoveries in terms of the abstract realm? And so I was fascinated by all of these questions, and I'm still fascinated by them. And I've been writing about her a lot, and I still haven't finished writing about her, I don't think. So, which is a very long-winded way of saying I was so thrilled to see Halina's film, because it was so exciting to see her finally, given her due in film, and in a way that people who might not know a lot about art could also have some kind of access to her remarkable story. And I thought that the film was really beautifully done. I thought that, often reconstructions in a film, historical reconstructions, can look a bit clunky, but I thought they were really, really beautifully done. And they made very, very clear how these pictures were made, and the fact that she was putting them on the floor, and in her beautiful 19th century clothes or early 20th century clothes, like a sort of a cosmic Jackson Pollock, and I thought that it was a very beautiful introduction to the work, and very sensitively done. And I thought that the different voices that you brought into the film were fantastic. And I also loved the soundtrack. I thought the music was really beautiful.
I will tell my composer, he will be there.
I loved the music. I thought it was really evocative, and it sort of responded in a very beautiful oral way to these incredible pictures. So, yeah, I take my hat off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can probably try to answer, because you actually raised an important question. You say, why didn't Hilma af Klint didn't show her paintings, and why didn't she? For me, that was never a question. Because if you are diving into her work and know what she was working on, reading, and how she was living, this is the most important difference. And that is the reason why she is not part of the art history, or was not. And I think the art history can't consume her as Kandinsky or Mondrian, because Hilma af Klint was not interested to dedicate her life into a career. This was not her primary thought. Kandinsky always thought about a career. that is the big difference. For me, for example, I just understood why I didn't like Kandinsky when I saw Hilma af Klint's paintings.
Right. And why was that?
She was connected, and Kandinsky tried to be connected. That is just my opinion. But in the end, you can see that. And why did so many people go to the Guggenheim or to this? You are absolutely right. The Stockholm show was absolutely fantastic because Iris Müller-Westermann chose the right paintings for the first time to see. She absolutely chose the right paintings to embrace this work for the first time. And I think, and that is something important, I just want to say, Hilma af Klint did a work without her ego. Everybody can feel that. It's not written there. You can't, but somehow you can see that. And I think that is a kind of the secret. And what I do like about that so very much is even now she doesn't fit into this art historical system. I made this point in the film very strong in the beginning. I had to, because otherwise nobody would look, for heaven's sake. I mean, there were so many exhibitions in the 80s. Nobody listened. But until somebody said, you know what, we should rewrite art history. And that was Julia Voss, the journalist. And then many people were, oh no, and why? And that's spiritual art, whatever that might be. But that is so interesting. And now the whole system is irritated. And that's what I like really very much about this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that art history is a work in progress. You know, it's not something carved in stone. Essentially, traditional art history was written by white men writing about other white men who were very good at promoting their work in the main. And which is not to deny the achievements of a lot of these artists. Of course, there are a lot of great artists within that canon. But to allow different voices and different kinds of art into that canon is so essential and so important, because as you say, Kandinsky, Mondrian, Malevich, all of them were very good at self-promotion, and they played the game. They wrote articles, they gave talks, they wrote manifestos, they badgered galleries to put on shows of their work. And as you can say, Hilma rose above all that with beautiful grace. Yeah,
Definitely.
And Halina, can we just come back to the point that actually both Eleanor and Jennifer made about the techniques that you use to actually tell the story? One of them being recreation, which is a tough order. It's especially also how you embrace scale, how you communicate the really essential points about her work. They're actually quite hard to communicate to an audience who's not there in the room. Like, how did you choose to do what you did?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I totally agree. I don't like the, how do you say, reconstruction of reenactments in documentary films most of the time. Most of the time it's horrible. But I come from the feature film, from live action movies. So, and here it was very clear for me how to show it. In the end, you don't know if you succeed. That is always the thing. But in the first place, I had an idea that I knew I had to keep Hilma af Klint somehow in the shadow, because I don't like that you see a face of somebody who doesn't look like the photograph you're showing, for example, and things like that. And I wanted to make clear how beautiful the work is. And it's always nice to, you can watch for hours people working. That's how it is. Fire, water flowing, and working people. And I just, even what she did when I saw in the museum these huge paintings, I thought, wow. And she was such a tiny person. I read that she was not very tall. And I thought, that's a great picture. As a filmmaker, you think immediately, oh, how great. She's doing such a big painting, and she's not a very tall woman. And I was also very interested in how much time do you need for something. And so when we prepared everything, it was really a great experience. And step by step, even I had this interview from Ulla af Klint, who knew Hilma af Klint. I mean, the wife of her nephew. And she told this story with the eggs, that on the island, all the neighbors said, oh, why is she buying so many eggs? She needed the eggs for the tempura. And that was, when I first heard the interview, I thought, oh, that's great. I have to buy a lot of eggs. We have to make a lot of eggs for the tempura. And actually, you do need a lot of eggs for such huge amount of color on the ground. And that's, so it's really fun making it. So step by step. If you're lucky to get ideas while making it.
And Eleanor, coming back to you, what would you like to share? What else the film made you think about or reflect upon, or certainly this conversation has made you reflect on now?
I mean, obviously, as a curator who works in an institution, I'm always kind of thinking about that, about what the role and responsibility is of an institution when it comes to that very living quality that Jennifer mentioned about art history, because, you know, we are part of the cultural forces shaping our understanding of canons, plural. And so I think I was reflecting quite a lot on that. In some ways, I feel sympathetic to institutions. You know, we have to be a little bit careful about you know, I was involved in curating this show a few years ago from Michel Basquiat, and it's one of people's favorite games to be like, you know, after Basquiat died, the Museum of Modern Art was offered, you know, pick any painting you like from his entire output, and they said it's not worth the storage space. And we kind of love these stories. I know. We love these stories, but we also have to be careful of these stories because institutions are also human and they are fallible, and they are, every living artist in the world offers their work to the Museum of Modern Art. Says, oh, I'll give this to you as a birthday present. You can keep it in your stores, you know, I'll add it to my biography. So we also have to remember that they don't always have the benefit of hindsight. They don't, you know, hindsight is 2020 and all of that. So it's a kind of difficult balance between there being this kind of urgency to redress in our programs, in our writing, in our publishing, and everything that we're doing, be redressing the artists that we're giving that profile to, while I think also understanding the historical forces that shaped things to be the way that they were, you know. So as we were saying, Klint was not promoting of her work for all of the right reasons, but therefore how do we think about the equivalent Klints who are working now, who are not promoting their work because they have either a kind of spiritual drive like she does, they might be very involved in ecological questions, they could be data scientists, they could be all sorts of different people who are promoting art that in 100 years will be considered, you know, the idiocy of our generation that we didn't see it. And I suppose it's how you kind of try and become more hypervigilant yourself while also being, again, I come back to this idea of forgiving, like while also being forgiving of the impossibility of always seeing the kind of Klints in our midst. But I suspect Halina feels angrier than I do.
You know, I think that is interesting because, you know, I have learned a lot about institutions. I am myself, even I was trained as an actress, I was working in theater, I'm not a big fan of institutions because people who work for institutions, and I don't mean you personally, but if you work for an institution, of course, you have some rules you have to obey. But an institution doesn't think. Humans think. What my question is why is now everybody innocent? I don't understand that. For example, the MoMA, you know, the MoMA hasn't included her. It's not about that they said, oh, we're not going to show her. They haven't even mentioned it. For me, I wouldn't care so much. But when I see where it goes to, you know, it was one of the reasons why it took for me so long to discover this work. So I thought, okay, now the MoMA is showing a painting of Hilma af Klint without saying something. Isn't somebody asking? I was asking them. I didn't get an answer, but I think they should say, you know, listen, we have changed our mind. Now we like her art. Or what even better, we don't like her art, but we have to show her because that's how we have to do it. And that's something I would love.
It is interesting because you're right. It is the direction, broadly, it is the direction that institutions are going in. So there was a very nice occasion like this when last summer I'd staged an exhibition of Lee Krasner, who was, broadly known, if at all, as the wife of Jackson Pollock. And there was some very good comments on social media about Across the River at Tate Modern. Brilliantly, Tate is the only institution that has a painting by Lee Krasner in the UK. So I had deliberately not borrowed it because I didn't want it to be off display at our major national collection. And it's in the same room as a work by Pollock. And somebody on social media had pointed out that in the work by Lee Krasner, they said she was an artist, she was also the wife of Jackson Pollock. And of course, in the work by Jackson Pollock, they say he studied with, etc., etc. But they say nothing about who his wife happened to be. So within, I think, 3 days, Tate had picked up on it with their interpretation team, and they said, brilliant, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will be changing the panels in the room. And they did. They changed them in 3 days. And I thought that is indicative of a new cultural landscape in which institutions, not everywhere, not across the board, but are genuinely trying to listen and respond. And here there are questions about how much you can rectify for the omissions of the past and how much you try and simply envision a different kind of future. But I think that for me, it feels certainly like a very exciting time to be curating exhibitions or involved in exhibition making, because it does feel like my colleagues internationally are thinking along similar lines of the urgency of these stories. But there's also something very important, which is just a practical question that you mentioned about funding. And I think it's probably something that we all face, which is after you have done the thing, when you have done the Hilma af Klint show at the Guggenheim and it has broken all the visitor records, and when you have done the Krasner project and you've sold out of your book and everything else, then everybody thinks it was a fantastic thing to have done.
That's normal.
But how do we shift the energy? And I think this is beginning to happen now in terms of a shift in climate. But how do we shift the climate so that there is that level of support for these projects as they are setting out? That we say, I have no idea who you're talking about, but I hear you and I think you have vision, and I think there will be a really broad popular appeal for this. I think that remains a bit challenging.
Yeah.
Jennifer, you're not institutionalized, so you can speak much more freely. Your thoughts on this, please?
Well, I totally agree with Eleanor in that I think that, this is a really exciting moment for museums and institutions because, things have been shaken up. All the certainties that have been, seem to have been carved in stone for so long, they're wobbling on their foundations. And, that can only be a good thing because now the idea of a single white male art canon has been, exploded apart. There are very difficult conversations being had all over the place. There are a lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments, but there's also a lot of energy and interest. And what I think one of the most exciting things around is that suddenly art feels important again because people are having huge fights about it, and if it didn't mean anything, if people didn't care anymore, if it was just, large paintings in the foyer of a bank, then, there wouldn't be huge fights about it. And so I think that's a really positive thing, and it's also interesting hearing from you, Eleanor, in terms of an institutional viewpoint about, that, one of the most cited facts about Hilma af Klint is that Pontus Hultén, who was the director of the Moderne Museet in the 1970s, rejected outright the gift of her entire archive, because she was a spiritualist. And, while on the one hand, I'm outraged by that because apparently he didn't even look at the work. On the other hand, for a very busy museum director to, out of the blue, to be offered an archive that is literally tens of thousands of pieces of work by an unknown artist, I can understand maybe he was busy that afternoon and just thought, she sounds crazy. And of course we go, that's outrageous. But at the same time, as a busy art museum director, you could call, there's some, I have some vague sympathy as well, even though he made the wrong decision. Yeah.
But Jennifer, didn't you think, I mean, interestingly enough, there are 3 women, I mean, like 3 German women were working now on Hilma Klint, Iris Müller-Westermann and Julia Voss, who started now.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting when you say about the museum director, I wonder, why didn't he think, or do you think he thought that, because we don't know that he's not alive anymore, but why didn't he think 1906?
Yeah, exactly.
Why didn't he think that?
I wonder how it was presented to him, though. I wonder if it was just she died in 1944. I wonder if did the nephew know the significance of 1906? He wasn't an art historian. I don't know. I'm guessing.
And one of the questions I have as well for you is something that I've been really grappling with myself, and I don't know that there's an easy answer, but is about the gender politics within how we have to get attention for these women. So Krasner still has to be spoken about as the wife of Jackson Pollock. I cannot just say they exhibited in the same exhibition in 1941. She was also a pioneer of abstract expressionism. You know, it's not enough. I still need that. And in a similar way with Hilma af Klint, we still have to say she was making abstract work in 1906, 5 years before Kandinsky was. Okay, but actually, if she did them in 1912, are we saying we wouldn't be interested? No, like, of course we still are. So that's also difficult, that there's a kind of, for me, it feels like there's a masculine bias within the very terms of the debate. That you have to be the first in order to be of interest. You have to be the biggest, you have to be the best, you have to be grabbing of these media headlines, you have to be married to Jack the Dripper. I mean, you know, like, are there not a different set of terms?
And of course, you know, that's such a good point, and I hadn't thought of that, and you're absolutely right. Why set up this competitiveness around, you know, brilliant artists who are being creative? And also this, I do get, especially as an Australian, a bit irritated by all this debate around the first abstract artists when, because, you know, in indigenous cultures around the world, people have been making abstract art for tens of thousands of years. I mean, look, in Australia, you've got, you know, abstract art being made for 40,000 years, you know, so it gets a bit, you know, well, come on, that's not actually the most interesting point here. The point is that she was making phenomenally interesting work, and
do we even define it as abstraction? You know, that's a kind of whole question as well, because it has abstract motifs, but it is deeply figurative. I mean, it is also, that doesn't make it in any way less interesting. If anything, for me, it's like all the more loaded with power, actually. But it's all coded. You know, I watch your film, Halina, and I think, I still don't know that we're ready to view these works. I think these are like, you know, ancient tablets, and I think we're reading a fraction of what is encrypted in them. I mean, for a start, we haven't made it to the bottom of the notebooks, right? Like, so.
Yeah, that is true. But I would say, I think I have to disappoint you. I don't think you will ever be able to read them in a way. Like, this is not because everybody can read. But what is interesting, they're working in a way, working in a way that people who are standing in front of the paintings feel what they are supposed to do. And that is the fabulous, grand thing about it. It expands. And actually, Jennifer, you said that in the beginning, that you said it was heartbreaking. You know what I think? I personally think, and I really mean it, this work is opening people's heart. That's what it's supposed to do. Hilma af Klint was very well aware of that. She wanted to tell people, you know, look, what the hell are we doing here on this planet? I have investigated a bit. Let's say I saw this and I saw that, whatever, but probably you can have a look, you know, it doesn't look like we think. And that is also something that I would like to refer to, because abstract art, I think it's a difference. Maybe it's not a difference if you're having in ancient times doing abstract things and around 1900, but for me, it was a huge, interesting discovery when I was doing the film, to learn how abstraction came into the world, abstract art, and that by the time where a huge change, a massive change in in science happened, all over the world, and everybody was very much aware of that. And of course, the moment you lose control over the things, and we have discovered so many things that we can't see, we can't touch, we can't hear, we can't feel them, but they are there. And they discovered, we're seeing such a tiny little thing about what we could see, and we're not able to see it. Then as an artist, of course, you're grateful, because then you can go everywhere. And that is that's how brave Hilma af Klint was. She went all the paths, and it was not easy for her. If you read, sometimes she had doubts, of course, but she was not afraid of thinking, going every way, and of course also every spiritual way. But that is very interesting. I love talking with the scientists, because if you dive deep into quantum physics, then you are even more away than abstraction, This is something, it's fabulous, and it is true, but you don't understand. And that's how life is, I guess.
Yeah. Halina, I wanted to ask you, have you personally been interested in spiritualism yourself? Have you tried, during the film, did you try and do a seance at all to maybe contact Hilma?
No.
You wouldn't try and do that?
I would say I don't have a need to do that. And because I already felt connected somehow. I had the feeling when I was standing there, and that's what I mean, in front of the paintings, that I do understand what she means. And I thought, and one of the first thoughts that came to me when I was in front of her work, I thought, what, now? I couldn't believe this now. I mean, it was 2013, and I thought, 1906, how can people do that to something so important? I thought, oh God, hundreds of exhibitions of Kandinsky, whoever, whatever, Picasso, but nobody thought, and I think people are afraid sometimes of that. I can understand that people are afraid of spiritualism in this way, how Hilma af Klint, because she was not afraid at all. She didn't try to hide it. And of course, we know now that Mondrian and Kandinsky, everybody worked the same way. But I would say, no, I didn't need to connect in this way, because I already felt a connection. And maybe because we share the same birthday. I don't know.
Oh, do you? Oh, wow.
Wow.
Oh, that's amazing.
But 113 years in between.
Right.
Halina, are there any other connections, strange connections like that you think sort of deepened your love of her?
Well, interesting things happen. I don't think this is so very strange or sometimes, but if you are coming to a level where she worked or something, things like that happen. For example, I sometimes shot I remember that I was shooting something on a place where I had to go, and in the editing room, I discovered that we were shooting it on the exact same date when Hilma af Klint was painting it. So that is somehow a connection over 100 years. You think, oh, she painted that on the 11th of July, and I was there 11th of July, just 110 years later. So, or a coincidence, whatever. I mean, things like that happen, but I don't find that so, it's not so strange. I think what I really find strange is that we are, and especially you can see that now in these times where we're forbidden to live what I feel right now. I mean, life is at the moment not happening, obviously. I would love to sit with you and have a cup of tea before we start a discussion, and then afterwards as well. But in these times, it's very, very important to talk about things that are addressed in Hilma af Klint's work, and that is, what is life? Is it our reality that is made by human beings? That is also probably one reason. I mean, I don't like to explain my film, but I think, Mia, we talked about that before, that I included nature. Because when I thought, I thought, oh God, I'm making a film about abstract art. What am I doing? What am I showing? But it was very clear when I went several times to the exhibition, and somehow I thought it had to be nature. That's the only thing on this planet humankind has not invented. We haven't invented that. It was here before us. It will be here after we're gone. And that is something where I can address life easier. This is also an abstract thought, probably, but that's how I felt.
And we have invented the constructs of nature.
No, but you haven't invented the grass. You haven't invented a tree. We can't, actually. That is our big problem right now. We can't invent the woods or something. We can do a park, like the lovely parks I know in England, but we can do a park. But that is then nature that is already somehow like, domesticated, I don't know the word. And that is, but nature is a kind of thing that we can't control, really. We think we can, but we will never be. That's not the plan. I don't believe that's the plan. And so that was actually my connection. I tried to connect that. And nature is, of course, something very spiritual. And Hilma af Klint started also there. She started to look at the plants. She made these books of flowers and mosses and leaves. And that is highly interesting, this book, what she writes. I mean, you could make a whole film just about this book because it talks a lot about feelings. And, and it's very, very, very interesting. I mean, there are many, many, many more interesting things about her work on Hilma af Klint, but we still have time to discover and to make new projects on her, about her.
Oh, Halina, can I just ask you? Sorry, weird echo. Oh, something's happening on the echo. Sorry. How has the Theosophical Society responded to your film? Because I know Rudolf Steiner, of course, was critical of her painting, and I wondered how the current day, what their line on Hilma is.
Well, the Anthroposophical Society, they haven't responded. The Steiner Society, the Anthroposophical Society, it's interesting, right? They didn't respond. And I mean, they allowed me to shoot and everything, and I don't know if they like to be Rudolf Steiner very much criticized, right? I mean, like that. And I think this is the problem. By the way, Hilma af Klint was, in the end, it was already, I think, in the end of the 20s, Hilma af Klint wrote somewhere in her notebooks that she doesn't want to be part of the Anthroposophical Society anymore because, because the wife, Rudolf Steiner died in the early 20s, right, in 24, 25. And I think his wife and the woman who was ruling somehow the society by this time, they were arguing the whole time. So the society were arguing. And she said, you haven't understand anything. And she didn't. And that showed to me that she was far ahead of many people. That's what I mean. And that's what you can see in her work. She wouldn't go anywhere. She said, even Steiner didn't understand. Maybe he did, but he didn't want to include her too much because that was such a power coming. But he probably didn't understand really what she was aiming at. Because Hilma af Klint, and that's what I mean with ego-less. She didn't put her ego in her work. Rudolf Steiner did, I would say. He wanted his own religion. Hilma af Klint, and I would say the Theosophical Society, which is highly interesting. I have, even here behind me, I have The Secret Doctrine of Blavatsky, which is really interesting to read. And I would say this is really the source where she came from, because early on she read that, very early in her life. And she really tried to live up to those moral standards, if you can say that. And I think you can also see that in her face, the few photographs that we have, that she's really looking, no wrinkles, very, very content and very relaxed, totally relaxed. And that shows that she obviously, she said, okay. And in the end, she was not happy that the work didn't find a place. She wanted her temple, and that's what I think she needs to get, because think she should just be shown in museums. She can be, but she needs her own place, because there comes a lot of more than just art within her. And I don't think the institution can cope with this because of these things that you said already, Eleanor. And that's clear. And so, but it could be this and that. There's so many works, and
also temporary exhibitions are by nature temporary, and that's never going to be enough. I think there's very good reasons to make a place to which people can make a pilgrimage. And kind of commune with the work in the way that you're talking about.
Yeah, and Hilma of Klint also thought about a garden and study rooms next to the temple, and many things that comes with it, that people can sit down and talk. And that's what you can experience in this. Jennifer said, go away, don't talk to me. It's true, in the first place you want to look at the paintings, but I have experienced very often, because I have been to so many exhibitions when I was shooting also, when it was touring through Europe, that many people, even they didn't know each other, they started talking in front of these paintings, like, can you believe it? No, have you ever seen it? No, when did you hear about it? So people started to connect already. And that's what I said, it's really heart opening in a way.
Is it possible, do you think, that the temple will be built?
Honestly,
the foundation have plans, no?
But actually there's also a group of artists that we're trying now to convince, also talking with the foundation, and they have plans. But what I think the idea is right now, and we're talking with the foundation, let's see if they agree, but I think we will do it anyhow, about a crowdfunding. Why not doing a huge crowdfunding worldwide? Because you need a lot of money for a museum, a lot of millions and millions of money. And but if it's a crowdfunding, everybody can give something, then this doesn't belong to anybody. And that would be the most important thing. It shouldn't be a temple that just belongs to an institution, or just to somebody who can write his name on the temple or something. It should be something that is coming up from everybody who can contribute to it. So, and I like the idea, but that's the very first idea we're having, and we're thinking of now how to go on with this idea.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
I will let you know.
Yeah.
Can we just, we've got a few comments actually coming in, and one of them sparks a good question actually to contemporize the discussion a bit. So several comments about how wonderful the film is, and that they have discovered Hilma through the film, and to thank you, Halina, for that. One particular comment from Arabella Beveridge, who says, thank you for this fabulous film. It was fascinating to learn about Hilma, but also understand the wider implications of the way the art world works and still works in relation to the way art by women is received. I'm captivated and energized by her work, and excited to get back to my studio later this evening in light of having seen the film today. So that's a direct impact on a contemporary working artist. And I wanted to pick up on, or get your response to that. Also talk how influential is she today? Can you see her impact on other contemporary artists?
Is this a question? Yeah, I probably Eleanor and Jennifer know more than I mean, just what I see, that many people, I see that on the social media sometimes, how many artists have worked now on her. And it's really inspiring. And if somebody says they started working, it is absolutely inspiring. I, for myself, had such a wonderful time, 5 years in making this film. Hard, but in the end, I would say, a very, very meaningful time. And if that works also for other people, I think, yeah, her work is absolutely deeply inspiring. Yeah.
And Jennifer, if I can hand to you.
Yeah, I mean, how influence is manifested is often a hard thing to gauge precisely. But at the same time, I think that, you know, the sheer amount of people who have seen her shows over the last few years at the Guggenheim and at the Modern Museum in Berlin and Camden and Serpentine, you know, it's been huge. And I think that there's been a real boom of interest in different ways of understanding the world and different ways of looking and interpreting the world through art that isn't necessarily aligned to the commercial world, you know, which is quite a big, brutal world in many ways. And so I think that there's been a huge interest in spirituality, in discussions around gender exclusion, of course, but also her imagination was so unfettered. I mean, of course, I know she said that she was in a sense interpreting messages from spirits, but at the same time they were made by her hand. And there is something about her that is very inspiring, I think, to countless artists who I've talked to, and writers, and, you know, just generally thinkers. So absolutely, I think she's had a huge impact.
Yeah, but by the way, Hilma of Klint, just to add that, she was, of course, saying in the first place that the spirits were helping her drawing, but after 15, she did her own paintings, and she was quite aware of what she did.
Yeah.
And of course, I think the same way. She was, I mean, on this planet, whatever spirit is telling you something, in the end, you have to do it.
Yeah.
They can't help you there. So.
Yeah.
And Eleanor, same question to you in terms of her influence, legacy.
Yeah, I mean, as Jennifer says, it's very very difficult to trace the manifestation of influence, because it's often not kind of literal in that way. And it's a funny thing when you're planning on staging a show, that sometimes your kind of communications or marketing team will say, oh, wouldn't it be great to get some contemporary artists to speak about what this artist means to them? And you say, well, I won't know until a month after it's opened. And they write to me and say, I've been 3 times and I can't get in. Can you get me a ticket? Then you know that it means something to them. So it's difficult to track these things, but they, you know, by God, they can't be influential if they are, as she requested, languishing in a storage vault in Sweden. So they need to be out and to be seen in order to begin to have a place in the world. And yeah, I think also inspiring in terms of this idea of working at scale as well. It was something that I just found so moving with Krasner, that, you know, the largest of her paintings are like 5 meters across, and you think you had basically no commercial interest at the point at which you were making this painting. You could sort of just about cover your heating bills. But in very practical terms, you know, we're all spending a lot of time at home right now. In very practical terms, where were you going to put that? Like, you know, behind your sofa? You know, the very kind of willingness to allow, you know, and this is something that you hear a lot when you speak to practicing artists, to allow your studio to just accrete in work, because it is more important to you to get these messages out there. And it is more important, you know, you said this in the film, Halina, I think there's one year where she makes 111 paintings, you know, to be feeling that you can entirely give yourself to that energy. I think for me, that's the big influence, actually, is to say, work big, work prolifically, work fearlessly. That's what you will then see manifested in another generation of artists who have the chance to see the show, to see the film, to feel some aspect of Klint's spirit.
Thank you, Eleanor. Halina, going back to the film, how did you decide who to go in it? How did you decide who to interview?
The protagonist, right? You mean, the people. Yeah, you have to. I was lucky, I would say. I was lucky to meet so many interesting persons, and that is highly interesting. I think the research process is one of the best things in a work, because, and of course, I interviewed a lot of people, and some of them are not in the film because they didn't work in front of camera or something. I mean, you also have to think of just, very practical reasons. But I would say, Iris Müller-Westermann, I mean, the curator, she was so very, she was deeply connected also with the work of Hilma af Klint, so that helped a lot. In the first place, and Julia Voss, the journalist, who now wrote a biography about Hilma af Klint. It will not be released in English, I think, or published in English by the end of next year. maybe the year after. But yeah, that was really great. And also we were exchanging our researches with each other sometimes. And of course, the scientists I met, and for example, the great artist Josiah McElhenney, we just had a Q&A last week with him. I was at one, I have to say it, in museums, you have always those panels with all art historians. Yeah, and honestly, most of the time they're incredibly boring. Because everybody's saying, oh yeah, this is great, and this is not so great, and nobody is really trying. Why not having a simple thought that at least, I mean, it's always interesting if something is, if you have a contradiction or controversial, it has to be controversial, because otherwise, why do you sit there? At least bring someone in who has an interesting question. And it was one of these panels, and I thought, oh, I think I'm leaving. And then behind me, Josiah asked a good question. So I stayed until the end of the panel. It was in Copenhagen. And then I turned to him and said, oh, who are you? And he said, oh, I'm Josiah, the artist. And then I found out he already did an exhibition by himself with Hilma of Klint. I said, oh, we have to connect. And are you coming to Europe again? He said, yeah, I'm coming often. And said, okay, then we have to make we have to make an interview. And that, so you need also luck and interesting people and people who are not afraid to open up and tell their opinion. Not everybody has to agree. Of course.
Actually, that's a really good point, Halina. I'd like to hear from Eleanor and Jennifer about this. Just the point that you make about, I mean, it happens in film too, the rather staid, rather dry ways often that his art history is presented. Film history is the same way. It's very elitist, it's very set framing, and part of what I think the film does so beautifully is it sort of cuts through all of that. Even the choices, as you're talking about, of speakers cuts through that. So yeah, I'd just like Eleanor and Jennifer to just pick up on whatever part of that you're interested in responding to.
You go, Eleanor. Yeah.
I mean, I feel very lucky because I work as part of an art centre, and that's always a kind of weird and wonderful blessing, because it means we can like have a choreographer respond to a visual artist and have a musician respond to architecture, and everyone in the building is very game for that, for that kind of cross-fertilization of thinking and ideas and speakers, and when we do program things for the space, we try and think like that. So I think the Barbican is probably one of the least art historically mired spaces in that regard. But it's definitely something that I think arts organizations around the world are very aware of wanting to break out of. And again, in a way, it also goes back to the question I was kind of posing before as well about the kind of subtle ways in which gender can kind of influence things, because sometimes we also feel that with women artists, or indeed with artists who've been marginalized for other reasons, be it that they're an artist of color, or be it indeed that they're a mystic, because that in and of itself is something that can be ostracizing. Sometimes institutions then feel all the more reason to do the boring stuff, because they feel they really need to kind of plant their roots firmly in the soil of art history. That's partly why I raised that question in relation to Kandinsky, because yes, I think it's fascinating, but I also think the work is fantastic without the question of where she sits in relation to Kandinsky. So I think that's also something that we're trying to kind of find our feet on, as well as like breaking out of those conventions of how we talk about artists, but also being fair across the board, that it's not, I mentioned having done a Basquiat show in the past. There's a terrible history of institutions being like, we've got a Basquiat show, let's do a panel about rap, or let's also talk about the art historical relationships with his work. There's a really important thing about treating all sorts of different artists fairly and dynamically and in an engaged way that's complicated. And I think people are increasingly really game for not just trying out different ways of doing that, but also, again, for listening to ideas about more exciting ways of having those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think that, to sort of sum it up in a way, is that the idea that, I mean, art history used to be taught that it was a very neat sequential journey, you know, that one movement led to another movement, an artist towed the line in that movement, and then another movement came towards, and it was this sort of idea of modernism heading towards some great resolution, you know, and all that's nonsense, really, because art history, being made of humans, is meant,
right?
No, very,
What
very
is
few.
also what I found so very interesting about when I was doing my research, and that's not just in the art, like art, abstract art or whatever art, is how many women biographies or female biographies you discover who are highly interesting and who were famous at their lifetime. And nobody talks about them today. So I would say, if we stop I mean, I don't think we should do that, but if we would stop showing male art now for 5 years, we wouldn't get at the point just to show all the women we have never talked about. I mean, the point is, even in school, I never heard about Artemisia Gentileschi. I mean, she was very famous. And now there's a show about her, but nobody talks. And I have the feeling, so it just happened in the last century, that they were not forgotten, but somehow literally written out of history. And this is, even with music, it's even worse, I have to say. But I could, this is tragic, because I think I don't want always to work so hard to get to know female artists, you know, and many of them were very, very famous at a lifetime.
But I think that time is up, like, quite definitively. I mean, for instance, when I was organizing the Krasner show, which is a different period, you know, it's 50 years on, it was very difficult for me to secure the loans from museums and institutions because they wanted to have them on display, which was a really good reason. You know, they were saying, we only have one painting in our collection, and if we give this to you, how do we tell the story of 20th century art? You know? So actually, the level of awareness that there is in a lot of institutions now globally about the stories that they're telling in their programming, the stories that they're telling in their collection displays, in their public programming, in all of these things, I think it does feel like there's a huge tide of...
Yeah, I agree, but I still think it's too slow. I have to say,
finally, he gets to have his
I know.
It's too slow. For me, it's too
all
slow.
this time he's listening to these women.
Yes, I know.
Like,
He's been whining.
When's it my turn?
You know, we're not living. Hello, we're not living forever, and I think so. I mean, and I don't want to pick just a project just because it's a female. But I think even here, Hilma of Klint has actually the solution. And the solution is as simple as it is, of course, hard to do, because everybody has to work for himself. Because at the moment, it's a trend. Do you say trend in English? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but
that's
trend,
right. Yeah.
That you just go, oh, we need the female. And everybody is afraid of not including someone female. That's not a good thing. I don't think this is good. If you're afraid of doing, then you do it. But in the end, it's more, we have to come to this status that there's no difference between female and male art in a way. There's no difference between men and women. It looks like, but there isn't. And just if we're there, then there will be a change. But if we're just changing because somebody is afraid to do it, and I'm the first who would say we need a quote that we need 50%. I would be the first, because otherwise it's not changing. But in the end, the real change can just happen here somehow. If people really be aware of that there is no difference, and that is something that will take some time. I mean, obviously. I would change it tomorrow. No, now, but I'm changing it now. But it's a hard thing to do it, even to cover it all over the world. Yeah. But let's hope the best.
Can we just carry that thought on a little bit? Just go back to the film though, Halina, and then Jennifer and Eleanor. I think would like all of you to comment on the sort of, well, Halina, your hopes for the film, the lasting legacy, because this film is being internationally distributed. Sadly, you're not in a cinema in person, which is what you obviously plan to be, but you have experience touring with the film. What it has been the impact touring with the work, and what do you want the lasting legacy for the film to be?
Yeah, that is very interesting, because I was again very lucky, because last year I toured to all the film festivals, and the film was released in Sweden in autumn a year ago, in Sweden already, and then in Germany. So, and we started here to show the film in cinema. So I have been to many. I have met many audiences, and what is interesting in these times now is I have never been hugged so much. People came to me and standing in front, sometimes they couldn't speak, so they hugged me. And that is something simply wonderful. So of course, I mean, it was not easy, because in the first place, when I had the film ready, nobody wanted it. No film festival wanted it. No distributor wanted it. Nobody wanted it. And even the Berlinale here in Berlin, it's a big film festival, and I thought it's just the right film for them. I mean, you never know, did they look at it or not? I mean, this is also something. But in the end, I have experienced a bit what Hilma of Klint experienced. Nobody wants it. But I have to say, it works out so very well. I'm very, very happy. So, and how happy can you be if people tell they're inspired, they want to change their lives, or if they're just happy and that they have discovered it. And yeah, if you get hugged a lot, there are worse things than that.
And Eleanor and Jennifer, what impacts, what legacy do you think the film affords, like moving outside just solely the art circles in other spaces, other places where people may not be privileged and access the somewhat rare?
That's what I would say, space. Yeah, is that I'm very aware that, when Jennifer and I speak, we both cite exhibitions that we've seen. We both have jobs that mean we have excuses to be going and visiting exhibitions internationally. That is occasionally a burden as well as a blessing, but mostly it's an incredible blessing and privilege. And there are many people, especially in the current circumstances, living around the world who sadly will probably never lay eyes on a work by Hilma af Klint, and we're completely reliant on films like this to be able to bring her work to those much wider audiences.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree totally. Yeah, the idea that anyone can watch this if they've got a laptop and get access to these wonderful worlds is just joyous, wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful place to end. So Beyond the Visible is available to watch actually on the Barbican. Barbican have built their own VOD player, so that's one of the boons of lockdown, which is accelerating a lot of cinemas actually embracing the online space while they were closed. So you can watch it, and that means also that then who's also benefiting from the profits of your view. So that's conscious consumerism. That means that money goes to Barbican, and it also goes to Modern Films, who are releasing it, and to Halina eventually. Exactly. So we like that, instead of anonymous organisations who don't pay their taxes, whose names I shall not mention. Yeah, you can also see it on Modern Films website, and you can also donate to several other art organisations or other local cinemas if you're not watching in London. So thank you to everyone for being here. It's
thank
really
you
important
so much.
Like to reclaim the frame. Thank you for being in the frame and name it.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.